to get into a conversation that is one of my favorite topics, and that's talking about our environment. It's talking about what's going on in Tobago and making sure we have a wonderful, beautiful, pristine Tobago for our future generations. Now, so joining me is, let me see, Mr. Howard Robin here, and he is a climate change specialist with the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, as we talk about coastal protection solutions, especially for Pigeon Point. So a special good morning and welcome to you, sir. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning, and thanks for having me as well. I'm doing fine.
All right, great. Now, you would have done, or you up and the team at the Division of Infrastructure and the Coastal Protection Unit would have been doing some research over the last couple of years into what's been happening at Pigeon Point. And as our viewers would know, over the last few years, every time that we've had any sort of spell with rough seas and so on, there is a bunch of the coastline that's damaged. There's a bunch of the shore, the businesses that are there on Pigeon Point, they are affected. I think it was just last year, it was pretty much flooded in the area and so on. So can you tell me a bit about the research that was done there and what are some of the results?
Okay, so the issues affecting Pigeon Point have been taking place over an extensive period of time. The Coastal Zone Management Unit under the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment recognized that issue. The THA as well recognized the issue, especially for Pigeon Point, which is one of the most iconic tourism locations in Tobago. And given the fact that it was being affected so intensely by the changes in our systems associated with climate change and coastal erosion, the THA saw it necessary to do a comprehensive study of the area, and that was done through a consultant, Smith Warner International. The study entails a comprehensive environmental study, but it also includes making designs, engineering designs that will treat with the situation taking place at Pigeon Point. Mm-hmm. So far, there have been 3 reports that have been submitted. First, there was the incipient report that was done. Then you had the inception report. Then you had the problem identification report, which was done in 2022. And now we are at the stage where the preliminary design report has been presented. Post to that, we'll have the final design, the complete design report that will be done, which would therefore present the problem and also the solutions. What are the solutions for Pigeon Point? At this present time, some solutions have been presented, but before those can be finalized, one, it has to be reviewed by the executive, but it also needs to come to the public, especially the stakeholders in that particular area, so they can have their input in terms of what they want to see, what the recommendations are, how they think it might affect them, what alterations they might want to see done to it. And as well, it will also have to go through the process of getting a CC, because that type of modification anywhere around the coast will be considered coastal modifications under the EM Act, and therefore a CC will be required, and most likely EIA would come as a consequence of that as well.
All right, so I just want to get a little bit more into the research part of things and some of the things that you guys discovered. Now, how rapidly is the shoreline being eroded in Pigeon Point?
Okay, so the study did not just focus on Pigeon Point. It extended from No Man's Land all the way to Sandy Point. And that is because in coastal management, we understand that it's not just one location, but you have a connection between the areas that around whatever point you investigated. And in Pigeon Point, you have the reef, you have the Bonaccord Lagoon, you have the wetlands as well. So it's a whole system that had to be investigated. In terms of the erosion taking place in Pigeon Point and along that coast, by nature, beaches and spits are dynamic. Mm-hmm. They move, the sand move from one place to another. So in the assessments that were done over time, you recognize that different localities along that coast have been responding differently. For example, the central beach, that is where people normally go and bathe close to the jetty. That area basically has been labeled as being dynamically equilibrium. It is basically stable. The sun may move, but in a while it comes back.
Almost like a cycle.
Like a cycle. The beach on the further to the east, that is where you're seeing the most erosion taking place at this point.
And is it that some of the sand from there is moving towards no man's land? Because we're seeing changes. And, recently I've been there, and you're seeing where the sand by itself, if you look under the water, it seems to be stretching further across the Bonacqua Lagoon. Is that what's happening? Is that what you guys observed?
No Man's Land and Shepherd's Point, in No Man's Land area, you have some erosion in one place, but you also have some deposition along Shepherd's Point and in the lagoon area as well. So in Pigeon Point itself, some of the sand that has moved from the coastline, you're actually locating it a little further offshore, creating a shallow areas just in front of this bar that is located there. So there's a shallow area that's developing there because of some of the erosion. But some of the sand, where exactly it is right now, is still uncertain. What we have found out though for the general area is that it's sand-starved, which means that there is not sufficient sand to really maintain the system as it should.
So what does that mean for the average man, or for the people that make their business on the beach and so on?
Okay, so as I said before, there are some areas that are relatively stable, but there are some areas that are eroding, and the system itself is sand-starved. The reason that it's been sand-starved is because there's less production of sand from the reef, and that area, and particularly in the southwest of Tobago, the sand that makes up the beach come from the reef. The reef has been suffering some degradation over time. And because of the degradation that it's suffering, it means it cannot produce the amount of sand that is required for the maintenance of the entire system. Therefore, in any solution that is recommended for Pigeon Point, one of the critical things that has to be included is beach nourishment. Since the sand cannot be rebuilt or restocked on its own from the reef, it means that you have to find an alternative source to bring sand to the area. So there have been about 7 recommendations thus far from the report. Some have been submerged revetment, some have been sand dunes, but in all that, it has been included as well renourishment or inclusion of sand into the area to type of reinforce the system and provide that much needed sand. But one of the major things that the report highlighted is the need to pay focus to the reef. The reef provides the sand, but it also retards the action of waves. Based on the modeling that's been done, basically 70 to 80% of the energy that comes from the waves hitting the reefs is dissipated there. And therefore, if you focus on the reef and restoring and rehabilitating the health of the reef, it means that you have a more resilient reef that is able to perform its function optimally. Because it's degrading, what has happened is that the hard coral has been reduced. And you have more algae on the reef at present. This one doesn't provide as much sand, but secondly, it also does not provide the texture, the rugosity that is needed to retard the energy of the waves. And
then at this point in time, we're dealing with rising sea temperatures, which is actually causing some incidents of coral bleaching on the reef at this very moment.
Okay. So that was captured in the report as well. The rising sea temperatures has caused coral bleaching over the past 3 years and in different years previously. And once that happens and the reef is damaged to a certain degree that it is not able to restore itself, what you get is the replacement with not hard coral but algae. And that is one of the things that is threatening the reef. On top of that, the reef is also being damaged based on the input from the land in terms of the water quality and so on that affects it. There is some positivity that has been highlighted in the report in respect to that, is that the water quality has improved over time. Since
did that have to do with COVID at all?
Not particularly. The emphasis has been on the wastewater treatment system that has been done in the Southwest. And the recommendation in respect to that is that it be expanded so that it can capture more of the sewage in that area and therefore positively impact the reef.
Oh, that's certainly good news because, I mean, what you said, there was quite a lot of bad news for our environment. I mean, and we just had World Wetlands Day on Friday and so on. And then, you know, we were exploring what's going on with our mangroves. And of course, the mangroves and the reefs work hand in hand with each other to protect our coastlines and so on. And we also need to take care of that. But what about the human activity that's happening on the reef? And or happening on the shoreline? What impact is our activity having on what are you seeing with the coastal erosion and the degradation of the reef and so on?
Well, I would start from the landward aspect. Over time, several interventions has been done, whether they have been groins, revetments, whatever. People have tried to protect their own property, and those individual actions have had detrimental effect on all the locations along the coast where you have seen erosion. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of the reef and the overall management, in terms of the activities taking place there, one of the things that the research highlighted was the importance of that marine park bill that has been tabled but has not come into effect as yet. It was done in 2020, and the exponents of the study have highlighted that it's important for that to actually be made law and come into effect so that overall management of the reef in terms of all the activities, the water quality, whatever is being done there will be done to the benefit of the reef. And that in turn can now be more resilient so that it can provide the services for the coastline that it normally does.
And viewers, just for some context, Mr. Robin, he's of course speaking about a bill that was actually passed in the House in 2020 and was sent down to Cabinet that would basically outline a marine park for Bucca Reef. It was supposed to start for Bucca Reef first and then take care of the Northeast and so on afterwards, but it would allow us to have some more regulations enforced in those areas. However, it's only at Cabinet at this point in time. There has been no movement on that since 2020. We hope that we can see movement on that. But in the meantime, now we have to look at what solutions we can do here in Tobago. And the study did point out some recommendations. What are some of those recommendations that you guys found that you think that might be most effective in trying to deal with the situation here?
So there were 7 major recommendations that were made, starting from Sandy Point coming towards Pigeon Point. In the Sandy Point area, close to the airport, it was recommended that the revetment that is there be reinforced and done properly. Subsequent to that, you have a set of groins that is just in front of the hotels, seawards. They did an evaluation of these groins in terms of their present status, and they recognize that they are not functioning as they should. They're dated, so they need to be replaced and restructured so they can function efficiently. As you come now towards the entrance of Pigeon Point in the Swallows area, there's an area where you have some boulders along the road.
Yes.
But during periods of heavy waves or high waves, the waves actually come over into the road. Therefore, in that location, it is intended to redo the revetment, but also include a boardwalk on top of that revetment heading into the Pigeon Point area. So that will allow people now not to have to walk along the road, but they'll have a more reliable and easy access, and also make some allocations for some of the vendors who actually vend in that area. When you get into Pigeon Point by the Heritage Pavilion, the recommendation for there is a sand dune,
yes,
a vegetated sand dune, but under the sand dune you have a buried revetment. So it functions in 2 ways. One, when you have intense wave periods, the buried revetment would actually take the bulk of the effect of the waves, but it wouldn't go forward. And in addition to that, the sand dune now the sand would simply spread along the beach and basically absorb and retard the impacts of the wave. So you're getting something that is aesthetically pleasing, but at the same time effective in protecting the pavilion that is close to the shoreline.
Now, I could talk about this whole day, but we only got a couple more minutes left, and I just want you to spend that couple minutes in talking about us people, how we should now be considering the way we act and what activities that we do on the reef, in Pigeon Point, the wetlands, all of those areas that are so sensitive. So, what are some of the things that we need to keep in mind as people?
Okay, so from a general point of view, one is that whatever you do on the coastline, whatever you do in general, has to be informed by research. But from a personal point of view, in terms of what people can do, is that people need to recognize that anything that you do in respect to the environment has some type of impact. And therefore, when you go to the beach, manage the trash that you carry. You carry it, you bring it back, because once it's allowed to stay there, it enters whether it's the wetland or the reef, and it causes damage that will now limit how your wetlands and your coastline can actually function. So people have to take personal responsibility in managing their garbage, managing what they do when they go to these areas, to ensure that they minimize the impacts on them.
All right, so apparently we actually do have some more time. So I just got the message now from my producers that we have some more time. But I know one of the things that the study did cover was even the wave action, how rapid the waves are coming, how higher they are coming, and how frequently they are coming. What are some of the things that came out of that particular study?
Okay, so what was interesting about the study is that you would have thought that the prevailing winds and the waves that they produce would be the most important thing in the beach in Tobago. But in particular in Pigeon Point, what is the most important thing is the north swells. These are the waves or the swells that are generated not by the localized trade winds, but by winds coming all the way from North America coming down. And they basically cause the most damage and cause the most erosion in the Pigeon Point area. So that was one of the most interesting things that was observed. It would have been thought that the prevalent winds would have been generated the waves that would cause the most action, and that is not the case.
And well, as we've seen just from observance, it is coming higher. How much higher?
Okay, so I can't remember the exact details of how much higher it's coming, but there were three things that were observed. The maximum wave height has increased over time. The average wave height has increased as well over time, and the energy produced by those waves have increased over time. So these three factors basically is saying that you have more intense waves and more energetic waves reaching your coastline. And since the reef is no longer capable of functioning as it used to in reducing the energy of the wave, some of the energy that would have dissipated before is now reaching your coastline, and that is one of the primary causes for the erosion that you see taking place.
So if I understand you correctly, the degradation that we're experiencing on the reef actually it's affecting the waves that we are seeing.
Yeah. So climate change has allowed the wave heights and the intensity of and the energy of the waves to increase. But this has also been affected by the inability of the reef to do its job as it used to. Since it's not as functional as it used to, because I said the rigorosity of the reef has decreased, and you have an increase in the water levels, it means now that more energy can now reach the shoreline. So it doesn't just dissipate on the reef, but it's now coming closer to the shoreline, and that is provoking the greater erosion that we see.
And then how much of our coastline have we lost, let's say in the last 10 years? Did the study cover that as well?
The study did, through satellite imagery, look at the areas that have been lost. But as I said, it is not the same for the entire coastline. It's in particular locations. So you have seen some areas where you have significant erosion, some areas where you have deposition, and some areas that are stable. The areas that have been erosion has been just after Swallows. You had seen some erosion there, and then you had erosion on the most inward point of the spit, that is where you have seen significant erosion. I cannot exactly quantify by how much, but I know it has been significant because in terms of the width of the beach that used to be there and some of the trees that have disappeared, you know that an extreme amount of erosion has taken place.
And you don't even need a scientist to tell you that. You can just look. I mean, if you've been around enough, you would see these changes that are happening. And what about the wetlands itself? You know, what in the studies that you did, what can you tell us about how that One Accord Lagoon is either affecting the reef, either affecting the shoreline, and so what's the relation there?
Okay, so wetlands, reefs, seagrass beds, they are a coordinated or integrated system. The wetland filters the water that eventually ends up on the reef and so forth. What we have noticed from the study, and IMA was included in part of that study,
Yes.
is that at the entrance of Pigeon Point, there's a section of the wetland at the back there with some water areas. What the study has shown is that over time, it no longer has a saline content. It is now basically almost a freshwater pond. And what that signifies is that there is no exchange between the wetland and the sea. And what was noticed is that there used to be an exit at the entrance of Pigeon Point, where you used to have that tidal exchange between the wetland and the sea. But that has been closed for years. And because of that, it has now restricted the ability of the wetland to flush. So it basically has only been getting fresh water. The vegetation inside there has started to change. And the dynamics in that wetland has started to change. Therefore, one of the recommendations that I forgot to mention was reopening of that area to allow that intertidal exchange and to build the resilience of the wetland so that it can provide the functions that it normally does to enhance the reef as well as to create this flush and this nexus between all these systems that would allow the area to function at its optimal level.
And how is that related even to the coastline itself? So like having that closed off, what impact is that having on the immediate coastline around it?
Okay, so the area being closed off means that you have no exchange between the two systems. The wetlands is an area that is usually a nursery for fish and so on. And what has been recognized in the study as well is that some of these important species have also decreased, like a parrotfish, etc. So if you do not have your wetlands which can serve as the nurseries for fishes and so on, then the obvious impact is that on the reef, the species that are necessary to maintain it and so on, more than likely would decrease as well. So you cannot separate the wetland, the reef, the beach, and the seagrass beds. They function together as one. They complement each other, they feed off each other, they benefit each other. And anytime there is some deficiency in one, it causes a ripple effect on the others. And that is not something that you want in your natural environment.
And then even as things are changing, I mean, we're seeing the projections. We heard from, COP28 and so on, what's been going on and the fact that globally, we're seeing these temperatures rising at a faster rate and so on. How quickly do we need to act before, we really see some detrimental effects from these external global factors?
Well, for the past couple of years, it has been harped about the 1.5 to stay alive.
Yeah.
And though there is not an exact date or a fixed date as to what will happen when, what is evident is that over time things are progressively getting worse. The study, although it recommends some short-term to medium-term plans, it also recognizes that sea level rise and climate change is something that is continually taking place. And therefore, one of the long-term plans have to be, how can you now plan to move or to relocate? So you have to have planned relocation as a long-term exit strategy as well. How do you build in those areas? You cannot keep setting up on these flat platforms. You have to now build on or maybe stilts to allow the water to actually go up and come back. So all these things are interventions or modifications that we can make to how we do things to allow us to be able to live in an environment that is continually changing. But we have to get to the point where we understand that in addition to coping with what is taking place there, we have to think about planned relocation in the eventuality that we can no longer expend money and the amount of money that is required to try to maintain ourselves in a particular location, because coastal interventions are extremely, extremely expensive.
Yes, and certainly, and we're looking forward to see how, those recommendations get adopted and what decisions are made, and hopefully we can attract the funding necessary to make the interventions that we need to make sure that we can have Pigeon Point for the future.
Yeah, that is the hope. It might not be able to be done in one instance, but the processes and the plans can be staged over an extended period to allow that intervention to be taken.
Certainly. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Robin, for what is a very insightful conversation as to what's been happening at one of our most popular tourist points on the island. This is an incredibly important conversation to have, especially as we look at continuing to build our tourism products and, just develop what we have here in Tobago. So without certain products like that, then we would have problems with our tourism products. So we want to thank you so much for our conversation this morning, and we look forward to having more as we see how that study gets adopted, how the results. I know you all are working on some more things as well in the pipeline. Yeah. So
okay, so thanks for having me, and once we have additional information when it comes to the public consultation, etc., we'll be involved.
Thank you so much. All right, viewers, well, we gotta go for a quick break, but we'll be right back, so don't go anywhere.
Rise up to a brand new dawn, and as the passion start to rise, the